On October 14, 1962, a U.S. U-2 spy plane captured photographic evidence of Soviet missile installations in Cuba. These images revealed medium-range ballistic missiles capable of striking major U.S. cities, including Washington, D.C. and New York. The discovery shocked the Kennedy administration, confirming fears of a direct nuclear threat just 90 miles from American shores. Intelligence analysts worked around the clock to verify the findings, marking the start of the most dangerous 13 days in Cold War history. President Kennedy convened the Executive Committee, ExComm, to debate responses to the Soviet threat. Options ranged from diplomatic negotiations to a full-scale military invasion of Cuba. The stakes were monumental. Any miscalculation could trigger nuclear war. Kennedy's leadership was tested as advisors clashed over strategies. Ultimately, he rejected immediate airstrikes, fearing escalation, and favored a naval blockade to buy time for diplomacy. This decision would define the crisis. On October 22, 1962, President Kennedy addressed the nation in a televised speech, revealing the presence of Soviet missiles in Cuba and announcing a quarantine, a naval blockade to prevent further Soviet shipments. The term quarantine was deliberately chosen to avoid the legal implications of a blockade, which could be seen as an act of war. The speech warned of retaliation if nuclear weapons were launched from Cuba, placing the world on high alert. As U.S. Navy ships enforced the blockade, Soviet freighters continued toward Cuba, escorted by submarines. The world held its breath as the two superpowers inched closer to direct conflict. On October 24th, Soviet vessels halted just short of the quarantine line, a pivotal moment that avoided immediate confrontation. Behind the scenes, frantic diplomatic efforts intensified to prevent disaster. While public posturing continued, Attorney General Robert Kennedy met secretly with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. These back-channel negotiations were critical in crafting a compromise. Kennedy hinted at the eventual removal of U.S. missiles in Turkey, though this concession was kept secret to avoid undermining NATO. The talks showcased the importance of discreet diplomacy in averting catastrophe. On October 26th, Soviet Premier Khrushchev sent a private letter offering to withdraw missiles from Cuba if the U.S. pledged not to invade. The next day, he added a public demand, the removal of U.S. missiles in Turkey. This dual proposal created confusion. Kennedy publicly rejected the Turkey linkage, but privately agreed to it, fearing the alternative, war. As tensions peaked, the U.S. military escalated to DEFCON 2, the highest alert level short of war. B-52 bombers armed with nuclear weapons circled the Arctic, while ICBM crews stood ready. The world teetered on the edge, with both sides recognizing the absurdity of mutual destruction. This brinkmanship forced a re-evaluation of priorities, paving the way for a deal. On October 28th, Khrushchev announced the withdrawal of Soviet missiles from Cuba in exchange for the U.S. no-invasion pledge and the secret Turkey deal. The crisis ended, but the aftermath revealed deep scars. Kennedy was praised for his restraint, while Khrushchev faced criticism at home. The agreement underscored the necessity of compromise in nuclear diplomacy. The crisis left the world shaken. Leaders and citizens alike reflected on how close humanity had come to annihilation. Newspapers hailed the resolution, but the near miss exposed flaws in Cold War communication. The event reshaped superpower relations, emphasizing the need for dialogue over confrontation. Cuba, meanwhile, felt betrayed by its Soviet allies. The crisis spurred the creation of the Washington-Moscow Hotline, a direct communication link to prevent future misunderstandings. It also paved the way for arms control agreements like the Limited Test Ban Treaty. The Cuban Missile Crisis remains a case study in crisis management, demonstrating the perils of brinkmanship and the power of diplomacy under pressure.